Hello, welcome to Scary Thoughts, Horror, Philosophy, Culture. I'm Mark Cate.
And I'm Chad Lott.
This is episode 121. We're talking about Aliens, the James Cameron film from 1986. You can reach us at WhatThe, WHATTHE, at scarythoughts.org. Anything to plug?
Nope.
Okay. Then let's get straight to it. Spoilers ahead. So where do you want to start, Chad?
Well, I would like to start with an apocryphal tale of how James Cameron pitched this movie, which I think is great. I don't know if you know this story, but he went to the whiteboard at Fox Studios and wrote the word alien and then put an S behind it with a dollar sign through. And apparently that is how this was originally pitched to the studio. By the time it comes out, it's 7 years from Alien, which is kind of a long time. But Fox, who I never cease to be amazed at how bad the studio people at Fox sound. There's so many movies that I'm a fan of that Fox made that you just hear how badly the studio suits interfered. And Alien was certainly one of those films, and Aliens was another one of those films. But I love the idea that this was straight up a cash grab.
Well, it was supposed to.
Yeah.
Supposed to be, and then turned out to actually be a pretty great movie.
Yeah. And then also, I think we should take a moment to just note what an absolute hold those gyroscopic magnet swinging things had on culture in the 80s. I feel like they were everywhere, and this movie might be responsible.
Yeah. All movies that are depicting the future or some alternate timeline, whatever, there are going to be these anachronisms. Hair is always the most anachronistic thing. Costuming, sometimes people take these interesting guesses because you can sort of mess with Paul Reiser's suit.
Yeah.
It's not a suit that people were wearing in the 80s. It was kind of futurized slightly, but not so absurdly that it was its own world.
Yeah.
Ripley's big hair was definitely an 80s thing that doesn't strike me as being very sensible in the future of space travel.
Yeah, the Fly This Friendly Skies graffiti on the pilot's helmet. It's are they 200 years later going to be referencing a Delta slogan?
United.
Is it United?
Yeah.
I can't.
But the other thing that, if I can just dig right into this up front, is when Ripley gets into the loader.
Forklift certified.
Yes. And will this do, or whatever her line is, it's sort of it pans to the guys and they go zoinks.
Where do you want it?
Yeah. And they sort of do a zoinks at her. And the joke is that they didn't expect a woman to be able to use it. Right? Which in a future world where Vasquez is on the team, that wouldn't be a joke. It was a joke for 1986. Yeah, girl power. 1986, she can use machines, even though she's a woman. But in the future, that's preposterous. So there's a little bit of a, that joke, that gag, and their response didn't really make... They could have been surprised, oh, I didn't know this random person who this trauma victim from outer space knows how to use equipment. But that's not what was happening.
Yeah.
That's chronologically anachronistic, I think.
I think if you were to ask whoever wrote the script, they probably were totally doing it in a mid-80s Zoinks style.
Yes.
It was probably definitely that. I think in the world of the film and the events of the film, you could make a strong case that they see her as a Weyland-Yutani suit, and they did not expect somebody that was... it'd be if you went to a factory or something like that, and the consultant could operate the machinery. I think that there could be an element of that too. And I think that Reed,
that's fair.
This is certainly a retconning of it, but I think it's also supported by the sort of far ahead for its time gender fluidity of the time. For example, the woman who is murdered in Alien, if you zoom into the text that's behind Ripley when she's being interrogated by the room full of Weyland-Yutani suits.
In this movie,
it says that she was born a man. So she's a trans woman. And then the Marines are talking about the women of Arcturia, the Arcturian women, and how one of them was a man. And it doesn't matter because the Arcturians are slamming,
Yeah.
or whatever.
Yeah.
And then you also have the, obviously Vasquez and the pilot. You don't really, even today, you don't have mixed gender attack forces, but this definitely has sort of that going on. So I think definitely probably the people at the time meant it to be a sexist joke, but I think the film has just randomly been, it just sort of reads like differently.
Yeah. Which is interesting for dated jokes to be read differently. Like they can be misunderstood, like God knows if you go watch a comedy from the 30s, half the jokes are just going to be very mysterious. What is even, you might not even know there's a joke being said.
Yeah.
Because it's referring to something that we just don't have any attachment to. But it's interesting for there to be something going on, and because time has passed, it just becomes another narrative.
Yeah. I think even the look of the technology in this film, time has passed so far, especially the first film, Alien, like the mother room and stuff like that. That analog technology is so weird looking that it starts to look otherworldly, probably to a modern audience. Whereas I remember looking at it, it felt very dated in the 90s, but now it feels cool again.
Yeah. I want to go back to the anachronisms though.
The Reeboks, obviously.
The what?
The Reeboks.
They were wearing Reeboks?
Oh, yeah.
I didn't catch that.
Are you not up on the Alien Reebok discourse? So they're called Stompers. Like that's the street name for these shoes. And they're worth about $800 or $900 now. But Reebok put them out. They were like Ripley alien shoes. And although, it sounds like somebody got shot. Hopefully.
I think somebody just got shot.
Yeah. Well, hopefully their friends avenge them. But the Reeboks were, Bishop wears them too. So they're not just Ripley's shoes. Right. But
I'm sorry, real quick. Reebok had some shoes out and they got used in this movie, or Reebok made shoes for this movie?
Reebok made shoes for this movie. What? So there's like futuristic Reeboks that Ripley and Bishop were wearing.
That's
but
great.
They made them. They put them out a few years ago. And the sort of like hubbub was that they didn't make them in women's sizes. And it's supposed to be like a female hero's shoe. And then later on, I think they put them out. But they just made them for dudes. But
did someone get fired over this? That's pretty dumb.
It is kind of dumb. Bad. But to be fair, like most sneakerheads are dudes, and it was made for sneakerhead collectors. But even still, shaking your head,
very bad,
feminist disdain.
Well, it's just if you're going to be mad at Bud Light for not understanding marketing, you can be mad at Reebok for not understanding marketing. That's just a stupid move.
Yeah. Kind of wanted a pair, but they're so expensive.
Yeah, I want a pair now.
Yeah.
But the anachronism I was going to bring up when speaking of gender is hey, Vasquez, anybody ever mistake you for a man? No of you, or however it was worded. Strangely still funny.
Yeah, still funny. And from an older movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But just thinking about that being a joke in the future, like imagine that we're in a time where gender truly doesn't matter and nobody cares. And how does that joke work in that space then? I'm not calling it out. I'm asking, like, does that joke become funny again because it's just not a thing? You know what I mean?
Yeah, who knows? I mean, like,
it would just be so hyper ironic for this time where gender in some senses apparently doesn't matter to make this weird joke about gender.
Yeah, again, it's like one of those jokes that just feels like the scriptwriter probably had like of his time intent, and time has passed, and looking at this movie with like the modern eye for it just changes.
I think for me that moment, what's more important than the joke is how she turns to the blonde dude and he just goes, "You're so bad." You can tell they just want to fuck so badly.
Yeah,
like every time they just give fuck me eyes in the background constantly. It's kind of one of my favorite Easter eggs about. It's not. I mean, it's in plain sight. It's not an Easter egg, but they're just like best buds. Plus,
yeah, I think they're rocking it like Spartans and just like just going for it.
Yeah,
yeah,
it's cute.
It's funny too. Think about this is an ensemble war movie. So the big difference between Alien and Aliens is Alien is sci-fi horror. This is sci-fi action with horror elements, which is that's fully a nerd record store designations, like it's hardcore, gore, horror, rap, or whatever. But I think it's pretty evident here. This is such an 80s movie, like the matte space painting ships landing and stuff, and like everything military in the 80s, it's all Vietnam coded. Like the writing on the helmets is totally Full Metal Jacket style.
Yeah.
The armor with the personalizations on it is totally, you don't really see that so much in the modern GWAT stuff. I wonder why, weirdly enough. Like you see it a little bit in Generation Kill, but it's probably just corny. Like probably modern soldiers think that writing stuff on your shit is like grandpa stuff.
Well, I wonder if also we had this extreme example of the disorder of, I know nothing about this. This theory is based on nothing and 99% surely not true, but Vietnam was such a clusterfuck in every way. There was such a lack of discipline. It was just chaos. And maybe that's part of the chaos, not to blame, just a factor of the lack of discipline and order in the armed forces in that conflict. And I wonder if it can symbolize that's when Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines don't take their jobs seriously, is when they start writing shit all over their uniform, which is supposed to be something that's taken care of and respected.
Yeah. I mean, I think the difference too is like in Vietnam, you're talking about a mostly conscripted force. Right. And now you have like an all volunteer force.
Right.
And it's strange to think about these characters. They're called Colonial Marines. And we talked a little bit about the kind of like lack of knowledge of like what the governance is of this interplanetary system. You get the feeling that Weyland-Yutani does whatever the fuck it wants. But there's also this organization called the ICC that they would have to beat and smuggle the xenomorphs back if they wanted that to happen. That becomes a plot point later. But then there's like these guys are Colonial Marines. So they're out soldiering in the colonies. They're off world. So that is historically been a wild bunch. Like when you think about like colonial forces on Earth.
Yeah.
The other thing that's interesting about this group of people is they're absurdly overconfident the whole time. And you get the feeling it's very like Gulf War I vibes where, you just, Saddam Hussein was like, I will defeat you. And then they just put bulldozers on the front of their tanks and just buried the entire Iraqi military in like 2 days. Like you get the feeling that's it. And it's also weird how they sort of, I think this is probably like a mistake of the film a little bit, and James Cameron has explained this, but on the side of the ship it says bug hunt, and it's a we endanger species, which I think is a great tagline.
It's so good.
It's like one of the best taglines ever, up there with like making better worlds for Weyland-Yutani. It's just, I mean, it's kind of funny too. Like, I wonder if that was kind of a nod to Ridley Scott's marketing background. That stuff is so good.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, maybe. Who knows? Probably not. But it's funny how like in the briefing, when Ripley's telling them all about the horrors that she's seen, and they say xenomorphs, and they're like, oh, it's another bug hunt, which James Cameron says is just like a futuristic way of saying snipe hunt.
Yeah.
Meaning a
which
thing
means
that you
nothing.
shoot from. It doesn't mean anything. It just means like a shooting something in a barrel sort of situation.
Yeah. It could have been a double entendre on the part of the screenwriters.
Right. And it's like they're not super alarmed when they see the face huggers in the jars. Like they're not like, holy fuck, there's aliens. Like if you or I, like if Biden came on TV today and was like, my fellow Americans, look what we have in a jar, people would freak the fuck out, and those guys are just like, oh, it's just another day at the office kind of. Although
it likes you or whatever.
Although when they're actually faced with them and fighting them, they have like terror, which I think is interesting. And then James Cameron, speaking of terror, talked about this film isn't about horror, it's about terror, which I think is interesting. In the previous episode with Alien, you had talked about horror scaling. And I think like that's what happens when horror scales. It becomes terrifying in the way that war is terrifying.
Yeah. The colonial angle, I think, is really interesting because...
Like, who are they fighting?
100%. Well, before talking about colonialism, yes, the... James Cameron, one of his, we were talking about how if Ridley Scott was to redo Alien, he wouldn't have made Ripley so sexy in the last act. James Cameron has, since making Aliens, found a respect for the armed forces that he didn't previously have, and recognizes that he made them into buffoons, probably out of a lack of respect for the job they do. And it is supported by the plot that Paul Reiser goes alone. The person in charge of the operation has never had a drop before. This is his first non-simulated encounter on a planet. I mean, you watch the movie and like they seem like badasses and it's really exciting, but they're actually like, yes, overconfident, make a million mistakes, not good at their jobs. So it's not entirely the leadership. It's that like Bill Paxton's character, he's bad at his job. Like he freaks the fuck out as soon as things go south.
Yeah.
He doesn't keep his cool. He blames everybody else for what goes wrong. He's really good to hype everybody up before anything happens.
Totally.
So he should probably just be a cheerleader.
Reminds me of the Jay-Z lyric from 99 Problems. Loud as a motorbike, but wouldn't bust a grape in a fruit fight.
Can you say that again?
Loud as a motorbike, but wouldn't bust a grape in a fruit fight.
I don't even get that. Interesting as a motorcycle goes by.
Yeah, that's totally planned. But yeah, he's like a classic loudmouth. You know?
Oh, I see. Okay. Yeah. So it's easy to assume that maybe it was entirely planned, that a lot of incompetent people. So, Ripley steps up, but she didn't have to step up very hard.
Well,
like, what's the guy that she ends up saving in the end? Who the only soldier that survives? Hudson
or Hicks. It's funny, like they get it wrong, and I always get it wrong too.
It is Hicks.
Let me look.
It's Hicks.
Okay,
yeah. He's pretty confident. He keeps his cool. I mean, he's got a different kind of confidence. Hudson is obviously a hype man and a loudmouth, but as they're flying down to the planet, Hicks is asleep.
Yeah, he's definitely set up to be like a completely calming force. It's interesting too that he was like as an actor, he was added pretty late into the process.
Yeah.
And he's like so good, and you wonder how different that would have played out.
Yeah, the dude from the Warriors was the original Hicks.
I know, it's so weird. I mean, I think he would have been pretty cool in it too, to be honest. But I think Paul Reiser's character Burke, first of all, a great villain, like a phenomenal villain.
Absolutely.
I think if you're like really trying to like connect the dots on some of the plot points, he has enough power in Weyland-Yutani to order somebody in the colonies to go check out the ship. Like he finds out where it is and they send people out there. And James Cameron explains like, well, why didn't they know the ship was out there? The idea is that the terraforming system lands first and starts terraforming, and it throws dirt everywhere. So it buried the ship, so they wouldn't have seen it. But then again, when they go look at it, it's like completely uncovered. But they might have uncovered it. Like the colonists might have dug it out, whatever. But he doesn't tell anybody what it is. So he has enough juice to send people out. He kind of kicks this whole thing in motion. And I think he probably didn't intend for everybody to die, because who would, But the Marine in charge, the way it works is the Colonial Marines are in charge. Like Ripley uses that later when they're deciding to nuke the planet. She's like, this dude's in charge now. You need to shut the fuck up. So it definitely feels like he would have intentionally put this person who was incompetent and new in charge so he could steamroll him.
Yes. But going back to these being Colonial Marines, I'm curious about what that can mean. If that's just about keeping order between planets that are being colonized. I think what's interesting about these fighters being Colonial Marines is that the alien species, the xenomorphs, depend on colonialism, essentially. And I have successfully not remembered anything from the movies that come after Aliens, which we'll cover next, probably. But I don't believe they travel through space, or at least as of yet, there's no indication that the aliens travel. Maybe. The
way it works in the extended universe of the mythos is that they're getting around because the predators are hunting them. So the predators will, in some cases, have an alien queen that they've caught on a ship, and it will produce eggs, and then they will drop ship the eggs onto a planet and they'll usually drop them next to whatever the most dangerous predator is. So it's like the hunt on hard mode. So they'll be like, oh, there's like some terrifying dinosaur creature here. What if it was also a xenomorph? And so they go down there and they have to hunt the initial outbreak. And if they don't, the whole planet is destroyed.
That's really dumb.
It is kind of dumb. And then later on in Prometheus, there's like the engineers are moving them around somehow for whatever reasons.
I would want to do some sort of like Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead thing from the perspective of the mother. It seems that the mother xenomorph is possibly more intelligent than I forget the delineation between the other aliens, the other xenomorphs. But she seems to have an acute intelligence that maybe the others don't. And I wonder what these are terrifying, destructive, evil beings. But if we can be in their head for a moment, they're obviously just animals trying to survive. And they depend on an invasive species to, they are predators.
Yeah. They're like those dickhead wasps that lay eggs in people's, mouth and nose and brain and stuff.
Yeah.
I could be wrong about this, but I think in some of the comics, it's walked out that they're actually like designed to be super destructive like that. Like they didn't evolve to that. And I think this is just another example of like when you know more about the universe, it just sucks more. I like the idea. Like you just don't know what's
almost
going
always.
on. But they do in the film raise questions of like the creature's intelligence and I like that it's a little bit vague because on one level they like cut the power. Like, okay, so they have to be smart enough to understand cutting the power, which is pretty wild. But they also don't understand the machine gun ammo thing. Like, so they know when the gun runs out, like the auto guns that they have at the thresholds. There's the whole thing about like, they don't know the gun's not empty. So they go and find another way around. And, there's so much discussion of them being like bees that I think it's not a stretch to think of it as like some sort of hive mind.
Yeah. Speaking of firearms, another non-anachronism is it made me think about the history of about guns. That we've had so many years. Let me start over. We had so many years of in the future, we will shoot with laser pistols, right?
Yeah.
But what's funny is this movie, I think, gets it right, which is that a metal projectile flung through space has been working for a really long time. And unless I'm not thinking of it conceptually the right way, the only thing that's changed is speed, accuracy. It's still the best way for one person to murder another person or another animal is to take a little piece of metal and fling it at that person or animal real fast. Yeah, and it makes sense that in 300 years or whatever, I'm sure we'd improve on it, but would we? Seems pretty good.
Yeah, I have a whole section in my notes on the guns and the gun conversation, which I think but I agree, it could be the case that just like the limiting factor for like laser weapons on the battlefield is the limiting factor for EVs, which is the battery. The battery's a problem. It's like you would have to have like a laser that you would see like the Sardaukar use in the Dune movies. It would have to be huge, like unless they saw that. And I think that's one of those things in like sci-fi. Probably nobody was even thinking about batteries in a different way back then. And then also stylistically, just guns look cool. And this Sigourney Weaver is like a total gun grabber. She's like totally anti-gun. And one of her demands for this film I thought was really interesting. Well, she had 3 demands before they gave her the $1 million that she deserved. She wanted there to be no guns, which is clearly not a thing. And I think they like big action sequences like this are not necessarily always written into the script. You just get like shooting at the aliens, and you might be thinking 1 or 2 shots. You're not thinking like an entire deployment of Colonial Marines just going ape shit. Her second demand was to have sex with an alien, which I could not find any more information about that at all.
Was that one of her demands?
Yeah, that was one of her demands.
Oh, wow.
And then the third one was that she die at the end. And she got
talked out of all of it.
Yeah, like they came with that.
She still got the $1 million, so.
Yeah, so good for her. I thought that was kind of interesting. Bill Paxton, being a Texan, was of course super into guns. And then there's a couple of people. The guy that plays Apone is was an actual sergeant in the military. So there's like this varying degree of familiarity with firearms in the set, which I think was neat. But I guess Apone, being a military dude, was like super into trigger discipline and not flagging anybody. So I think the fact that any of it looks realistic is sort of maybe due to his presence on the set.
Yeah, there is a moment where when Newt first appears, someone starts firing and Hicks immediately pulls the gun.
Yeah, it's when Newt runs across.
Yeah, that's an interesting detail.
Yeah.
I wonder who inserted that into the scene.
Yeah, it's a really great little piece of like character building. Like, so he's obviously really good at seeing shit, which it reminds me of people who play those video games and they're like, oh, there's a sniper in that tower. And you're like, that's an invisible pixel. How are you even seeing that? But I'm sure we'll get more into the industrial design of this film because I think that's really like, to me, the big standout of this whole universe is the industrial design. But the pulse rifle is an all-time great sci-fi weapon. And it's a Tommy gun with a pump-action shotgun under it and some plastic pieces.
Although Hicks brings an actual shotgun.
Yeah, which is pretty cool.
For close encounters.
Yeah, it's a great line. Just
great
fun.
line.
We were talking about, like, is there intertextuality in this film? Yeah. That comes from a book. You know, that some nerd in the 70s just came up with these classifications of different alien encounters. But it's clearly a nod to, like, Close Encounters, the movie. And then there's another in-world intertextual thing, which is the captain of the Nostromo. The character, Tom Skerritt plays him.
Yeah.
He works for the Tyrell Corporation, which is the company from Blade Runner. So you're like, oh, one, it's a nod to Ridley Scott, but it's also like, oh, they make replicants. Are these like replicants in that world? Or is this like, are the Colonial Marines maybe putting down rebellions of replicants? Is that maybe one of their jobs?
Yeah.
Would be kind of cool to think about.
Tell us more about the squad leader. What's his name?
Apone.
Yeah.
Al Matthews.
Yep. Folk singer.
You sent me a
funk
video
and soul
today
singer.
Of him performing.
On top of the pops.
He's great.
He's great.
Yeah. And, you know, he was in the military. He was legit. He seemed to be like pretty intense on set, but he is absolutely hilarious.
His line, "Look into my eye," it makes no sense and is the funniest, for me, the most memorable line of the movie, even more than Paxton's lines, because it's so like, wait, what?
Yeah.
He's so aggressive with it.
Yeah. All the dialogue in this, you almost wonder if dude that wrote the dialogue in Predator and the helicopter scene punched this up, or it has just the same feel to it.
Oh, when was Predator?
87 is when Predator came out. So
okay.
It would have been a little bit later. It wouldn't have been,
yeah, because I was just pointing out the like, ever been mistaken for a man? No, have you? You're so bad. And they do that handshake.
Yeah.
Hold it real hard.
Yeah, I wonder where it must have been in pop culture to do that sort of handshake. I wonder now obviously it's Predator is where everybody knows it from, but it must have been from something else.
Probably wrestling.
Hopefully wrestling. Let's see.
But you were talking about Al Williams. Off mic, you were talking about Full Metal Jacket and the contemporaneousness.
Yeah, so the Al Matthews.
Thank you.
Yeah. So apparently, like both films were shooting at the same time at Pinewood, and
Full Metal Jacket,
and Aliens, and some of the cast would mingle and party. So you wonder, like, if there was an esprit de corps or like a competition. Like, I'm just imagining this like super phony Tropic Thunder level reenactment of the scenes in like Band of Brothers, where like two platoons that are like rivals get together, but like a really shitty actor version of it, I think would be pretty funny.
Sounds great.
I mean, this is one of those films to like get it real. They have everybody do like a fake boot camp for like a week before the film, and which I think at the time was probably pretty revolutionary. But now, like, you contrast that to probably like Chris Pratt at this point has probably done at least a boot camp's worth of training for his various Navy SEAL roles. I
mean, I feel like I watch a TV show where like some nerdy guy who spends all his time in the library, if he has his shirt off, he's like fucking totally shredded.
Yeah.
It's so funny that like muscular men in movies from the 80s and before are not that different from me, and I'm not in good shape.
Well, I mean,
then now, like the nerds who are supposed to be average Joes are just totally zero body fat.
Yeah,
spent a lot of money on a lot of
even
dubious substances to get them that
look
way.
at Hugh Jackman's first portrayal of Wolverine versus like his most recent portrayal of Wolverine. It's like, I mean, science is amazing, man.
Yep.
And then, yeah, you're right. Like in this film, because you get the coming out of the sleep chamber scene, you get to see some Colonial Marine bodies and some Sigourney Weaver bush, which I think she's just really into like having the bush on display in these movies, because do you know the whole thing about Ridley Scott having to airbrush it out in the first?
Oh no.
I have not been able to confirm this story, but apparently she just was like, I'm not fucking shaving. And then the Weyland-Yutani underwear that is so famously spoken about and we talked at length about in our Alien episodes, it was just hanging out like Bikini Spider Central, you know? And they allegedly had to airbrush it out, like cell by cell, and it was expensive. But I could not confirm that story, but I do hope it's real.
I'm imagining like a recut of it someday where someone adds it back in.
Yeah. I saw a comment that it had been added back in some 4K restoration, but I don't think that's real. But it's pretty hilarious. But I just like the fact that Sigourney Weaver was like, "Go fuck yourself," like because it sort of like plays against the whole thing that we talked about in the last episode about the male gaze, and she's sort of like, you know, doing her thing in a very Peaches sort of way, which I personally think is pretty damn cool.
That's great.
But to the body type thing, it's pretty much Vasquez and one of the other dudes has abs, and that's pretty much it. And you know, everybody else is in like World War II dude shape.
Right. Yes.
Yeah. And now it's a totally different thing.
Very.
Speaking of Vasquez, you had off mic mentioned that you didn't want to get into the accusations of brown face.
I just thought like, do we need to go there? Like, is that value added? But then it turns out you have a lot of value to add on this subject.
Yeah. Well, I have a kind of a hot take on this where.
Well, should we first point out who the actress is?
Yeah. So she is, first of all, her biggest sin for this role is that she's British, in my opinion. So that is.
Well, she was also in Near Dark, which we did an incredible episode about 10 years ago when we started this podcast. And so she and Henriksen and Paxton, is that it?
Yeah, that's it. But that's enough.
You know, did a movie with Cameron's wife.
Yeah.
Just not so long before this. And so they already had this camaraderie.
Mm-hmm.
But Jeanette Winterson played this like trashy, menacing vampire in Near Dark, and then is so transformed for this role.
Yeah, totally. Also, she's the mom that gets killed in Terminator 2 when the T-1000 kills the woman through the milk. She's John Connor's stepmom.
Oh.
Yeah. And then it's funny, like in Henriksen, it has the honor of being killed by 3 of the best sci-fi monsters ever. So he gets killed by the Terminator, he gets killed by a Predator, and he gets killed by, well, I guess he gets killed. We'll say he gets killed.
That's rad.
Yeah. So, I mean, man, he's such a great actor.
Yeah, I love
but
him.
So at the time this came out, I don't think anybody thought Jeanette
Winterson?
No. She has a very Jewish name. Let me look it up real quick.
Goldstein.
Jeanette Goldstein is as Jewish a last name as you could probably get.
Yeah.
Like at the time, like I have definitely seen friends who were, you know, Latino, Latin, Latinx, however you would like to refer to yourself. This was a beloved character. Like this was like a character that
it's great
was considered like a, you know, Chicano classic kind of. And something I've noticed about people who are like people in this culture, there's a video of Japanese Chicanos in Tokyo, like going full on like every Japanese subculture group does. And the comment section of this video is amazing. Vice put it out. So if you look up like Chicanos of Tokyo or something like that, and the host of it is an Asian woman, and she's sort of over there being like, don't you think this is kind of cultural appropriation? And of course, the people in Japan are like, we celebrate this culture because it's glorious. And the comment section is nothing but Mexican flag emojis and people being like, way, like just totally super supportive of this aspect of their culture going around. So this is one part of why I have come up with this theory, that I think that Vasquez's character in the film, it might be Nacho Libre rules, where in the film Nacho Libre, Jack Black did not want to play like a brown-faced Mexican character. So what they did was they wrote it in that he is a German, he's a Mexican of German descent. So he gets all the cultural stuff. He gets to do it on camera as bold and loud as he wants, but it's not appropriation because of that. And then I found out that Jews have been in Mexico since 1519. And there's a bunch of Jews that were basically captured by the Catholic Church, and they're like crypto Jews. And so they were forced into Catholicism, but they maintained their secret Jewish religion, and they've just been in Mexico since the 1500s. So it's possible that this Jewish woman could have been a Vasquez.
So you're retconning race.
Yes, the whole thing. I'm doing the whole thing. It's Nacho Libre rules. So
that's fascinating.
Yeah.
I mean, you're basically applying the
history.
Well, you're applying the sort of narrative navigations that people do when they're like, well, actually, if you pay attention in the third movie and start applying these like rules and to like history. Fuck.
Yeah. I don't know. I was just
like, I want to be on board, but
you seem not on board with my Nacho Libre Vasquez theory.
No, it's really fascinating.
Well, I just think it's kind of an interesting. I love weird, unknown eddies of culture. You know, like for example, the food I most want to try is a halal Chinese food in the world. I would love to try it. I think it would be super interesting. And there's also Chinese Mexican food, which I think would be quite delicious. Me personally,
there's also like Japanese Peruvian food or something like that.
Like,
there's one
like
restaurant in the
steaky.
Bay Area. Very curious.
Yeah, but that just happens with like, you know, when I always think about like the solution for things is what Edward Abbey said is we just got to all have sex and make these brown babies. And I think that the food that comes out of those like kind of strange family mixes is just very interesting. But I'm also, and also I'm not super defensive about this. I am Jewish, but I'm not Mexican. So I can't, you know, again, I think this is probably like the joke that no one even thought about this Jewish woman playing a Mexican character at the time. Yes. But if you wanted to enjoy this character for a free card, I think my historical retcon is probably valid enough.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
Well done.
Yeah. Well, I was trying to think of like, what could we say that hadn't been said? I mean, this film has been well trod.
Yeah.
You know,
for sure.
But I was also I went down the deep rabbit hole of Mexican Jews. And it's just like, it's super fascinating. Yeah. It's just like an interesting kind of like thing I had no idea about.
Yeah. So what do you think of the Giger, no Giger-ness of this movie?
Well, I would have loved to have been able to see what his xenomorph queen looked like. This one was basically designed by Cameron, and I think it looks cool. It certainly looks cool. It all works. You know, they made some slight tweaks, like the chest burster has little arms now instead of the arms that were sort of like stuck on the side of it. I think that doesn't work as well. James Cameron said he thought the first one looked a little too larval, but I thought that was pretty cool. Like, I think the larvalness of it makes it extra creepy somehow. But it's weird to me that he says he thought Giger would be hard to work with, because Ridley Scott describes him as being like a delight to work with.
Yeah, he might have just not wanted to pay the money.
Yeah, I don't know. But I don't believe Giger was available. He was like working on something else at the time.
Am I correct that Giger's name wasn't even in the credits originally? I think they might have just like erased him from the movie until he went after them. I seem to recall this is based on something I remember from 100 years ago.
I don't know.
If only there was a way to find out.
I mean, he's so forward in the credits of the first film. You know, it's a creature designed by whatever. I think the opening credits is a really interesting sort of thing that happens. Is when you think about how slow the word alien comes on screen in the first film, and it comes on super fast in this version, which I think, you know, a little foreshadowing of things to come, much faster aliens. Oh, yeah. But since we're on the topic of the designers of this film, I'm a huge fan of everybody who was involved with this. The two main ones that I think people know are Ron Cobb and Sid Mead. And Sid Mead is, I think, probably my favorite sci-fi designer. or illustrator. If you enjoy the way Blade Runner looks, it's totally his shit. And I got to go to the Peterson Museum, which is a car museum, a few years ago, and they had the cars from Blade Runner, and they're just exceptionally cool. And they just seem like they work. And then the other dude, Ron Cobb, he made like a gang of the droids in Star Wars, and he's really well known for vehicles. And his little skill is like when he draws something, like Sid Mead would like have a little bit more fantastical elements, even though it feels very sort of real. Ron Cobb stuff, he wants it to look like it works. And so that's why like the drop ship looks like a Harrier and stuff. So I think those two guys are, in my mind, as good as it gets for sci-fi design, and to have them both working on this film, I think is why it's so good. Yeah.
Speaking of vehicles, it's interesting how much the vehicle that comes out of the drop ship looks so much like, oh my God, what's the SpaceX vehicle company?
Tesla.
Mm-hmm. It looks like a Tesla truck, but bigger.
Well, that truck, the ACP, is direct design influence on the Tesla Cybertruck. And Sid,
it is?
Yeah, Sid Mead is like, Sid Mead didn't design the Cybertruck, but he's the name that you see most often referenced in the context of like what they were going for. It's actually one of the reasons why like I get hating on the Cybertruck, and I love watching all these videos of people destroy them in interesting ways. And I've come to really just like not like Elon Musk, man. He's just, early on, I was kind of like, oh, he has like Spaceballs, Easter eggs in his cars. What a delightful dude. Now it's just, I don't know, man. It just seems blech, you know. But I do.
He's the Kanye West of capitalism.
Yeah, kind of. But I mean, I am a fan of the look of the Cybertruck because I'm a fan of Sid Mead.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's like Peter Lamont and John Richardson and Stan Winston. They're all special effects dudes, and they like crushed it hard. There's a funny story that one of them, I think Winston says, that when the awful studio suits of this were reviewing the film, they were like, where's the special effects budget? We just see sets and vehicles. And they were like, yeah, it's all fucking effects. And so they were super pleased that they had fooled these dorks.
Yeah.
But the very first time I ever saw anything in the Alien franchise, I flipped on HBO, and it was the very beginning of the scene where Ripley's running the APC through the wall.
Yeah.
And so the first thing I ever saw was that vehicle, and I have loved it ever since. And it's funny, it's actually the truck that they taxi planes around with.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's like super flat and low.
Yeah.
And it's heavy as fuck. And I guess they had a lot of trouble moving it around the set because it was like such a big, huge thing. But I think it's one of the great sci-fi vehicles.
Totally. Yeah, let's talk about how this was a sequel. But so one of the most lauded sequels ever.
Yeah, everybody loves it.
I was going to say is Godfather 2, right?
Yes.
But The Godfather 2 is pretty much more Godfather.
It's not a departure. Yeah, it's like
this is another genre. This is as you brought up earlier, and I think that's it's a bold and interesting way to approach sequels, and I wish it happened more often.
Yeah,
I mean, it definitely, you have to really believe in it and be willing to roll the dice on that. The thing that people liked about the first one is something you're willing to jettison and start from scratch, which almost is disrespectful to the original in a sense.
Yeah.
Not necessarily, but you have to be pretty audacious to go like, okay, there's a thing that people loved. Most of the stuff that people liked about the original and take it in an entirely other direction.
I just think about even the boldness of the genre jump at a time when you would walk into like a video store and like, where would you put that second movie?
Right.
You know, like it doesn't really belong in horror, you know, but you kind of want it next to the original one. So do you move the other one into sci-fi? Like they're both sci-fi, but like you could scare the fuck out of a little kid. There's a great video that I've seen of, you know, just man on the street interviews. And it's like a family walking out of Alien, and they just seen it and they have a little kid, and they were clearly trying to get a Star Wars experience. And the kid was just like, they're like, do you think that it was appropriate for this kid to see this movie? He's like, probably not. And the kid looks just like white. God. So that kid probably grew up cool. But I was thinking about like sequels that were sort of genre departures like this. The Terminator and Terminator 2 are sort of like that.
Yeah.
They're a little bit closer, but they also have the robot is bad in the first one and good in the second one.
Yep.
So he basically went back to that well. Evil Dead and Evil Dead 2 are
the exact same movie.
the same movie, but it's like such a zanier. The second one is a lot zanier.
It is, but I would almost say like that is an exception in the other direction.
Mm-hmm.
I know I'm about to deeply contradict what you were just pointing out, but I almost feel like Evil Dead and Evil Dead 2 are the opposite of switching genre. I guess it switches genres a little, but I can't think of a part 1 and a part 2 that are more similar.
Well, so my next one on the list, you might find Gremlins and Gremlins 2 are, I think,
completely different movies.
Completely different movies, but I think they do the thing, like the second Gremlins is so absurd and over the top and slapsticky that it's a little bit...
Which is like Chainsaw and Chainsaw 2.
Yeah, also
Chainsaw
on the
2
list
is
here.
the comedy version of the first one.
I think we just saw Texas Chainsaw Massacre at the Overlooks. I guess it's 50th anniversary of it at the Balboa Theater.
Yeah, thanks guys. That was great.
So much fun. One of the most fun nights out I've seen is my wife never sees us in our nerd environment around other fellow people, and she grew up cool, which I've talked about before, and so has no real connection to this culture and had not seen the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
So weird.
And the whole experience for her, it was just hilarious to force her to sit through. It was my birthday, so like I pretty much every year just get to drag her to something she doesn't want to do. And that was this year. But you know, like we're part of this community of like horror people, and we're having these like horror movie conversation out and these like intensely autistic conversations afterwards. And she's like, every time I tried to talk to somebody, they just looked at the floor and wouldn't engage. I was like, yeah, that's how it goes, lady. But we're just like hanging out with everybody afterwards. And it was so much fun. But it's been a while since I had seen it, and just the relentlessness of the back half of that film for somebody who's not ready for it is fucking hilarious to watch.
I think it was funny. Monique was there as well, and she had seen it before. She's maybe seen it twice, maybe only once. I mean, she's seen it before, but she spent the whole movie covering her face. Not the whole movie, the last half, trying to block the screen from her.
God, I'm so jealous of people who have that experience with horror movies because I think you're so lucky to be afraid of horror movies because you have this like opportunity to have a visceral entertainment experience in the way that like if you go see a comedian, you're just going to laugh and you're going to have like a physical reaction to a piece of media. And like, I wish I had a physical reaction to that.
See, this is what's interesting to me about you is that you're invested in a genre that it would almost be like if we had a comedy podcast and you never laughed at anything.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, no, I see how this is funny, but I've just never laughed before.
Yeah. Well, I think
but comedies are my favorite genre.
I mean, I've definitely been on record that horror as a thing is not by itself my favorite thing.
Sure.
You know, like to me, horror comedy is 100% my favorite thing because I think type of humor that you see at a war concert is like completely up my alley. Like to me, the violent act is like a joke and is hilarious to me. It's like in Monty Python, the arms cutting off. Like it's just a flesh wound. That's what horror is to me. And the funnier it is, the better. But my second favorite thing is sci-fi horror because I want the thing that like the Space Marines are fighting to be intimidating. Like, so I think that Aliens is clearly my favorite of that genre. But the other thing I like is just because I grew up around religious people, I love like Christian theology horror. So if like that's a thing. But as far as like just being like scared of a movie, I've never been afraid of a horror movie.
I know we're sort of rewinding a bit, and this obviously is not a comedy, but I am very thankful that when it's funny, it's very funny. Like it's mostly Bill Paxton, not entirely, mostly Bill Paxton. But could you imagine if this movie was the same movie, but anytime someone tried to punch it up with a joke and it didn't quite land as well as it did, it would be a much lesser movie, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But when it's funny, it's pretty damn funny, and it really helps.
it's such a quotable movie. Like
Yeah.
there's so many lines that people remember, you know, the end fight scene, "Get away from her, you bitch," is like
Totally.
such a thing. Like I've heard people say in jokes, "Game over, man." Like how many times have you heard
Gorgeous.
somebody say that?
Poetry.
The number of times I've been talking about just anything I don't like that's happening in a city, and you say nuke it from orbit, it's the only way. Like I think about that in relation to San Francisco constantly.
Yep. Well, not far from that. Was it you who I brought up the why don't we put her in charge? And you said that that should be a Kamala Harris slogan?
It wasn't, but I endorse it. I was digging around to see if I could find any more of the little crew backgrounds that are playing in the Ripley interrogation by the Weyland-Yutani.
Yeah.
And there's one, there's a DVD that has them, so it's sort of considered canonical. And so somebody wrote them all out and stuff. What's irritating about it, though, is it's slightly different than in the film, which drives me fucking crazy. For example, the one character being trans is not mentioned in this set of documents. But what is in there that's interesting is that Ripley at one point is trying to get maternity leave, sues, and is like basically like fired and then rehired slightly after and given the maternity leave. So I who knows like if that's considered canon or not. But the idea that, you know, her motherhood was a plot device in her history with the company, and that she's been like fired multiple times, you know, because she gets fired at the beginning of this film.
Right. That reminds me of another thing, and I'm going to go into territory that I often abhor with the actually of backstory and things like that.
Yeah, you don't like lore.
Yeah. Well, these huge properties that wield billions of dollars that people spend too much time dissecting, something that's often quite ramshackle. Mm-hmm. Like the consistency between alien movies is about as legible as it is between Friday the 13th movies. Mm-hmm. It's just a richer mythology. That'll probably garner a lot of hate. So it is canon that Ripley had a daughter that she left behind.
Yeah.
That was about the age of Newt when she left behind. When she gets back, her daughter has already grown old and died of cancer. Mm-hmm. So Ripley's space trucker journey was how long?
It's supposed to have been 6 weeks total. Like she's out for 6 weeks back in time for the little girl's birthday.
Okay.
And
that's
then,
not as bad as I thought it might have been.
Yeah. And so the years thing, though, is like super brutal. Yeah. But also, though, I think that gets a little messy because 6 weeks is not enough time to like warrant the sleep pods, in my opinion.
Probably not, unless it's really uninvasive.
Andy Weir, you know, of The Martian, he wrote his sequel, Project Hail Mary. He's such a clever writer in some ways. Like he really knows like to give the people what they want. And he is so prescient to the knowledge that Project Hail Mary was eventually going to be a movie. I love Project Hail Mary, and it has like a great alien in it. And and sleep pods are part of the plot device. And he, in his very engineer nerd mind, has like written them in a way that they would work if they actually existed. And one of the things that, he has happen is that you have to stimulate muscles so the person doesn't atrophy inside. So after a couple of years, you emerge from the sleep pod jacked.
Oh, that makes sense. Right?
And it's hilarious because it's like Ryan Gosling is going to be playing the lead in that film. He's attached to it right now. So it's like he's like he had the foresight to write in a scene where like Ryan Gosling could be shirtless in his movie. Like what a fucking gangster.
That's great.
Yeah. So smart.
I just rewatched The Martian again last week. It's great every time.
Yeah, I don't know what it is about. I mean, obviously the story is great. Ridley Scott's a great director. Matt Damon is so charismatic. The cast is super charismatic, so it has a lot going for it. But I could watch. There's scenes I rewatch from that movie like quite often. like the whole sequence where the David Bowie song is playing and they're working on Earth and on Mars to sort of make the whole thing work, I think is just an absolute delight.
Yeah.
There is no delight in the Weyland-Yutani universe.
No. I do have one complaint about this movie, which is that it...
Too much testosterone?
No, that's fine with me. I mean, dealer's choice. But Alien was an incredible movie. And so much of what makes it what it is how little information we have as an audience.
Yeah.
Even the information that's given in the director's cut is too much.
Yeah,
like
I
it gives
agree.
extra that shouldn't be there. And this movie, I fucking love it, but I think that the way it adds more information takes away from what is horrifying about the first one. And you brought up terror, and I think that's a totally interesting way to think about it. It's the Phantom Menace effect, which is really bad for horror. Not always. There's not a rule here, but pretty much I love Alien, and so much of what is strong about it is that it's so unknown. There's an interesting anecdote about Aliens that the original cinematographer wanted to blow out the set with lots of light so you could really see the detail of these sets. And eventually Cameron was like, fuck no, and fired him. I forget what his name is, and brought on a cinematographer that did shoot the majority of this movie. Or maybe it ended up being all the movie. Maybe they reshot everything. And I think that is sort of metonymic for what I'm talking about. Shining a floodlight on something that's inspired by H.R. Giger and washing it out erases what is interesting about it. What's amazing about these movies, the first two especially, is what you don't know. There's another thing a YouTube video pointed this out to me, that when they first approach the I'm forgetting what it's called, when they land, they drop in and they go and they start exploring.
Hadley's Hope.
Yes. The camera's almost pointed exclusively at them and tracking their reaction. And it takes a while before the camera pans around and you see what it is they're exploring. So not only is it dark and weird and mysterious, the camera isn't even letting you in on what they're seeing, which adds to the tension. And so I feel like the fact that Alien had a sequel, like, great, have a sequel, I don't care. But it's the beginning of a downward spiral of more information is less fear. More information is less complexity.
Yeah.
More information does not actually make this world more interesting. It is what it is, and I don't want to be prescriptive about how it should have been done. But there is part of me that wishes that the consecutive sequels did not just provide us with more information, but rather explored other possibilities that still left us in the dark of the mysteries and horrors of infinite space.
Yeah.
And how terrifying colonizing planets could be.
Yeah, I have like two things to say. One quickly is that you and Joe Rogan have exactly the same opinion on it. Like, there's a really funny video of him.
That is so often the case.
Yeah, but there's a video of him and Matt Serra, the all-time great UFC fighter, and it's like one of their MMA episodes, and they're just talking about the new Romulus alien comes up, and they're like, oh, is it any good? And one of the other guys has seen it, and he's like, oh, it's more like the first Alien. And then Joe Rogan basically says, the first Alien is so much better because you don't see anything and you don't know what's going on. He says exactly what you say.
Wow.
And then Matt Serra kind of doesn't totally agree. He basically affirms what's great about the military sci-fi elements of this film. He's like, it's just so much. He's like, it's just so cool and looks good. And, you know, he talks about that scene where the motion detector, which is a really great plot device. Yeah. It's such an interesting little gadget for the film because it actually builds tension so well.
Yeah.
And they open up the top of the thing and then they see all the aliens coming. And that's exactly what you're talking about. Yeah. It's literally the alien spotlit, you know, and so it shouldn't be scary. And it's not scary. And then Joe Rogan also kind of talks about how, like, once you have like machine guns and stuff, the individual alien ceases to be super scary. And then you have to have like a ton of them. So then it becomes like you're in the territory of Alejandro Jodorowsky, where he's like, one eye is creepy, 10,000 eyes is creepy. Like, so he's just like, more is more. Right.
Well, more can be more. Like, if you're trapped in a house with a zombie, that's terrifying. Yeah. If there is a horde.
I'm glad you mentioned zombies too, because what's interesting, like zombies and the xenomorphs have the same thing where like the canonical solidifying of the rules of them is what you play off of, like the more you like, and it sort of forms up over time. I don't think there's like too much difference. Like my buddy Brian Thies that worked on the Alien versus Predator comics, they had like a Bible that he right. mentioned to me was, and there's just like very firm rules. Like you can't introduce like a helicopter xenomorph for whatever dumb shit.
Totally. And you have often brought up this thing around Tarantino having backstories for objects and characters and all of that, that there's this elaborate universe that is behind everything you see in a lot of his movies. And I think that is information that makes the text richer. I don't want to know that information. So I'm thinking about like, I am more invested than you, it seems, in covering each movie in this franchise, but I'm also cognizant that I'm going to need to not every episode say what I'm saying now at length again and again, which is I don't want more information. I like Alien, but I don't need all this explication. I don't need all this backstory. It doesn't make it scarier or more interesting. There are other things about these movies that I do like.
Yeah.
But it's not the Phantom Menace part.
I think that's not going to be as much of a problem going forward, because I think the conversation shifts from, we go from an amazing film to an interesting adaptation of film elements to a series of failures.
Yeah.
But still have interesting elements. Like they're still using Sid Mead's designs. So I'm still happy to look at it. The thing that falls away that I think is a real miss, and it's sort of in 4 and some of the Alien versus Predator things, but it's not in Prometheus, is greed is an element in the first 2 films in a very real way. And the evil of greed, there's like 2 villains. It's like greed and the xenomorph, and the greed is actually maybe worse. And that's one of the points that they make is like, Paul Reiser's character is actually more evil than the Queen. Like she explicitly says that in the film. And then when you get into like Prometheus and stuff like that, the element of greed goes away and it becomes sort of like this one weird old guy's desire to live forever. And Ridley Scott introduces these really cornball theological elements that I think are quite trash. And it loses the sort of greed element. But the scene where Ripley's interrogated makes me think of how good of an idea your Weyland-Yutani, but The Office sitcom is, because Weyland-Yutani seems to have the worst fucking corporate culture of all time. Like they're basically interrogating her. They've lost billions of dollars on this thing. There's all the proof in the world that it happened. In the interrogation scene, there's a guy sketching. Yeah. There's another dude doing a crossword puzzle. They're just clearly not paying attention. They're like smoking cigarettes. They like fire her and then sentence her to therapy, which is, I was like, oh, that's the worst thing that happens to her. And then they got to bring her back later as like a consultant. It's just like that's totally like how it works. Like, you like lay somebody off, but then you decide that you need their function. Yeah. So you bring her back. But the greed of Weyland-Yutani, I think, is phenomenal in this whole franchise.
Yeah.
But not used enough later.
Yeah.
The Alien versus Predator stuff and like the movie Predators and all that stuff sort of brings in a bit of a almost not Men in Black, but a sort of like shadow government element that I think is not as successful as the pure evil of a corporation.
Yeah.
I think that's pretty much it. That's basically all my notes.
Okay. What have we learned?
I have learned that the cold embrace of a corporation can cut both ways.
That's pretty good.
Yeah. And that you should not join the Colonial Marines.
Don't do it. I've really learned about the value added of Bill Paxton.
Yeah.
Revisiting Near Dark and revisiting this. There's something really to be said about character actors you just let them do their damn thing.
Yes.
And when done right, really brings so much.
Weird Science, Chet.
Yeah.
I mean, like, that's an all-time great brother villain.
Totally.
Yeah.
All right. Write us at scarythoughts.org. Thanks for listening.
I don't know. I'd rather have my knee hurt than not eat ice cream.